Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, 3 film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week we dive into 2014 even more, playing catch-up with reviews of Ride Along, The Nut Job, and others, plus add one more film to our 2013 holdover list, the Coen brothers' Inside Llewyn Davis. That movie features a cat in a lively supporting role, so our top 5 this week is all about our favorite live-action film animals. We also, of course, have our triple feature reviewing 3 older films, and this time that's Beasts of the Southern Wild, Justin's pick for Guilty Pleasure Month, Starship Troopers, and for our Oscar A to Z, our most recent one yet, 2011's Albert Nobbs, starring Glenn Close. First, though, I want to bring to your guys' attention something happening in theaters starting January 31st, and that is a re-release already of Frozen. Huge hit for this movie. This is about to eclipse Despicable Me 2 as the biggest grossing animated hit of the year. And Disney is re-releasing it in a sing-along form to over 1,000 theaters, so parents and kids alike can sing along with all of the hit songs following the bouncing snowflake. What do you guys think of this?
Well, I think it's a cool throwback to what they used to do with some of the big Disney movies, and I think it's just kind of a testament to Frozen's success ever growing. I mean, it's a good movie, and I think it's a kind of a cool gimmick. I'm not sure if I'd really be down for it. It's not really my thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I really ever was that into it when I was a kid, but I feel like it's something for families that could get together and enjoy it, and I think it could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and clearly the soundtrack is selling like gangbusters, so the music is, I'm sure, a big part of the success of the film.
Oh, yeah, well, as we know, some of those songs were really good. So yeah. It's understandable. I think a lot of people like to join in.
Cool. Justin, what do you think of it?
I think it's a great way to cash in on it. I think it might be a little too soon, but I mean, Frozen's got great music and great songs, so I think it's a great way to get families in there, get them involved. I'm hoping it won't get a little too annoying given the setting, but I think it could be a lot of fun. I think it's a smart move on Disney's part.
Yeah, you did mention the phrase cash in. Do you think it's, all about the money grab there?
A little bit. I mean, you also got to figure at this point, everyone who's wanted to see Frozen has probably seen Frozen by now. So they got to figure out what's another way we can market this to keep people coming back. Mm-hmm. So sing-along isn't necessarily the worst idea in the world, not to mention they want to get this seen as much as possible before March 2nd when they're obviously going to announce the upcoming Best Animated Feature winner for 2013. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Well, I will point this out, too, in sort of conjunction with the upcoming Oscars. The sing-along version that they're going to do in Los Angeles at the El Capitan Theater is going to have indoor snow flurries and an onstage Elsa. And that's obviously a prominent theater where a lot of Oscar voters may attend. So it's sort of, that part seems like a little bit of a, hey, look at us before the Oscar.
Honestly, I really don't think there was any doubt that they're probably going to win something
I don't
for
think
it. So
I mean, why are they worried?
They're pushing this so much. Like, is it there's a chance it's not going to win?
To be fair, that does sound awesome.
Oh, it does sound awesome.
However, I do think it's a little unfair that they're going absolutely crazy pushing this.
Yeah. And
no other contender has this amount of money to do something like this. Obviously, we're not going to see anything for Ernest and Celestine or Wind Rises for that matter, unless they're going to go for something kind of.
No, there's certainly
dramatic.
DreamWorks
Disney
has pretty deep pockets with the Croods.
But I think they know they don't have a fighting chance.
Nah. At least not for the Croods.
Well, Croods wasn't their best movie.
No.
It wasn't.
Maybe it's a little too soon, but I still think it's a good way to get people to enjoy it. Personally, I think they should have waited a year or two.
That's actually what I was just going to say, because there's no Pixar movie coming out this year, and they're doubling up next year, and obviously Pixar is a Disney-owned property, so why not re-release it next winter when Frozen is, on everybody's mind again, the cold weather.
Wasn't it a great movie last year? Hey,
right.
They're bringing it out again, but this time it's a sing-along. Woo.
I mean, I guess maybe the logic is it'll already be on DVD and Blu-ray by then, so...
It'll hurt sales, but I don't know. If
Not to mention, they have Big Hero 6 coming out, so...
Yeah, that is true. I guess they don't want to counter-program against themselves.
It's true.
But, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm interested to see how exactly they roll it out, whether it's every showing at the theaters they're doing the sing-along at is going to be the sing-along version, or whether they sort of mix and match. Because I don't know, like if I was first-time goer, I don't think I would want to sit in the sing-along version.
No, so I could definitely see them at least having one just sort of regular show.
Yeah. But I guess we'll see. I imagine it's probably like a 1 week only kind of thing, and then the subsequent viewings will be just the regular version.
But let's be honest, every time Disney has said this is exclusive, it's only 2 weeks, they usually push it out for a couple extra days, weeks, so on and so forth, to get the most out of their money.
Well, they're not saying it's an exclusive anything. That's my opinion.
Oh.
I think that it would make sense for it to just be the gimmick for a week, and then to bring it back to the regular version.
Okay, that makes sense.
I mean?
That's fair.
Because then you've got the Lego movie coming out in a couple weeks anyway, so at that point I think Frozen will probably have finally hit its peak.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's move on to our new releases for the week, and our first one up is Ride Along, and Justin's going to tell us about that.
Okay, Ben Barber, played by Kevin Hart, is a security guard living with his girlfriend Angela, played by Tika Sumpter, whose brother James, played by Ice Cube, is one of the toughest cops in town. Desperate to prove his worth, James agrees to take Ben on a 24-hour ride-along to show his dedication and unintentionally gets thrust into one of the biggest crime cases in the city. While both Dan and Joe will happily tell you I'm far too harsh on stand-up comedian and actor Kevin Hart, I have to give credit where credit is due. It actually looks like Kevin Hart's actually trying on this one. This may have been a result of the weak narrative and other performances, including a by-the-numbers job done by his co-star Ice Cube, but he does try to offer up some witty humor and usually, keyword there, manages to hit the mark. Had this been in a slightly more original film with a few less stock characters, Ride Along would have easily received a higher grade. Instead, the film ends up being an average, albeit still relatively generic, buddy cop comedy, which coasts almost entirely on Hart's clever humor, and for that, I'll give it a C.
Not bad. I thought there were pretty decent-sized laughs throughout, but I found it only to be by the two leads, Kevin Hart and Ice Cube. Side players like Brian Callen, John Leguizamo, and Sumpter added absolutely nothing to the mix, and I think that definitely hurt the film. But Cube and Hart have really good chemistry together, and I thought that was enough to make it through the film. But like Justin, I will echo his sentiment that the entire movie is pretty generic, and for my money, we even saw this kind of a premise as recently as 6 months ago in The Heat, and I think that hurt it as well, especially because The Heat was a slightly better film. So I'm going to give Ride Along a C+. Joe, what'd you think?
This movie felt like it had an alright premise, but falls flat in just about every area. Things that bothered me the most were simply the fact that Ice Cube's character would state rules of conduct for Kevin Hart, like calling for backup when you're outnumbered, and then contradicting them. I think we were supposed to feel sympathy for him due to being concerned for his sister, but he's usually kind of unreasonable. This made him kind of unlikable for me. The plot is standard, though there are some okay action sequences. The story has been done to death, and it doesn't offer much new. However, I actually kind of did like Kevin Hart's character, and despite his obvious immaturity, found that his heart was in the right place. Plus, I felt that Kevin Hart did lend some good energy to the movie to keep it from being totally stale. The few laughs that I had were from him primarily. Ice Cube didn't do too badly either. Overall, I'd say this movie might be okay for hardcore Kevin Hart fans, but otherwise it's pretty forgettable. I give Ride Along a C-.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's one I would go out and watch again. I kind of got my laughs from it, and that was that. Whereas with something like The Heat, even though it was rather generic, I mean, I only gave The Heat a B-, but there were so many laughs, Fast and Furious in there, that I've seen parts of that movie plenty of times because I'll go in on my break at work and watch it. This one I don't see doing that with.
Well, honestly, I think it had a slightly better plot, too.
It did. And I think Melissa McCarthy and Sandra Bullock were both likable in their own way. Like you sort of mentioned, the Cube character wasn't exactly hitting the mark for you.
Not really. I mean,
for likability.
I understood why, but I couldn't find myself really liking him that much. I thought he was just a jerk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't fleshed out really until the end, why he acted like that. But even then,
it wasn't enough for me.
Yeah, it was a little bit I
mean, don't get me
shoddy premise.
I thought that was a decent scene, but I think it was way too late.
Yeah, it was a pretty compelling scene.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
But unfortunately, it was a little bit underwhelming with the reasoning.
As Justin would say, it was a little late in the game.
Justin, I do have to take issue with something, though.
Hey, Dan, before you go, he did say something nice about Kevin
Hart. I know he did. But, we all know you're not a Kevin Hart fan. But I guess my issue is you throw around a lot, and not just with Kevin Hart, but with a lot of people, not trying. He really tried in this one. He doesn't try. Just because you don't find Kevin Hart funny doesn't mean he doesn't try in other things. I mean, he obviously, was very successful with the stand-up special, and that's where his main income comes from anyways, the stand-up.
I wouldn't necessarily consider that trying. I'd just say that's him doing what he does. Admittedly, he kind of throws everything at his audiences and hopes something sticks, which I guess you can call trying. I kind of call it spitballing.
It's a form of trying.
I disagree with that, too, though. I think he knows what his audience wants, and that's what he gives them. That's the character. Most comedians have a quote-unquote character that they are.
I do agree that with the character that he was playing in this movie, he was trying to go a little beyond that and do something a little more subtle.
And for the most part, I would say it's probably his best job on a film. I mean, it's not great, but it's at least a step in the right direction for the guy. I can easily say he made me laugh in this one more than he has in Kevin Hart Let Me Explain or Think Like a Man, for that matter. Wow. Or I just thought he was flat and annoying.
Well, Think Like a Man wasn't a good movie.
Period.
I think that's a fair statement. Well, it'll be interesting to see your reaction to these next few films, because between now and, Think Like a Man 2 comes out at the beginning of the summer. There's, I think, 3 other Kevin Hart movies in the pipeline. About Last Night,
that's
Think Like a Man 2, and I think there's one more. No,
I can think of, but
maybe because I'm thinking we just saw Grudge Match. Yeah. That was the beginning of the Kevin Hart onslaught. All right, well, on to our next film, and that is The Nut Job. In The Nut Job, a pack of park animals led by a raccoon voiced by Liam Neeson are suffering their worst food shortage in years when recently banished Surly Squirrel, voiced by Will Arnett, stumbles upon a closed nut store that is really a front for a mob operation, but nonetheless is stocked with years' worth of nuts. Problem is, the mobsters have a pit bull trained to get rid of pests and protect the building and its contents. One of the park animals, Andy, voiced by Katherine Heigl, discovers Surly's supply and offers to help if he will split their earnings with the rest of the park. They even end up making friends with the dog, so it becomes the animals versus the humans. This is definitely not one of the better kids' movies of late, and though its animation style and general terribleness strike comparison to last year's Freebirds, its story is at least mildly more interesting. However, it's no less unfunny, and features some really mediocre voice work, especially from Heigl and Brendan Fraser as her partner Grayson, not to mention one of the absolutely most pointless end credit sequences of all time, featuring Psy dancing with the animals to Gangnam Style for literally no purpose. Arnett is one of the bright spots, and it's no surprise considering all his history with voice work and comedy, and the message of redemption in the film is a good one. But you would do better to take the kids to a repeat viewing of Frozen, perhaps the sing-along version, or just wait a couple weeks for Arnett and Neeson in the Lego Movie than to waste time on this pointless job. I give The Nut Job a D+, which is the same grade I gave Freebirds. Joe, what'd you think?
This movie feels like there was some honest heart behind it. The premise, though silly and open to various dirty jokes, is kind of a nice homage to old heist movies. Sadly, beyond the intent, there isn't much that really stands out. The basic story has been done to death, and the characters aren't really that interesting for the most part. But despite this, I did feel some life from the movie. The animation, while not breathtaking, was a step above duds like Freebirds, and the voice actors were actually putting some energy into these cliché lines. I can't say that made me laugh much, but the story was simple, it wasn't really bad, and the actors made the characters slightly more interesting. And I truly feel that young kids would get some decent entertainment out of it. The Nut Job gets a C-.
Okay. And you gave Freebirds a D, right?
Yeah, I really hated that.
So slightly better than Freebirds.
Yeah, I think it was a bit better.
I mean, I think that's probably the easiest comparison movie for The Nut Job.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was it the same studio?
I don't believe it was.
Because the animation style looked a lot like that, and I was thinking, this looks kind of like Freebirds, but a lot less ugly. So that's one thing I guess I liked about it.
Yeah, Freebirds was done by Relativity Media.
Oh, that explains that.
And that was their first foray into animation.
Ugh.
And then The Nut Job was Open Road Studios, which is their first foray into
People are really
animation.
trying to break into this now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a competitive market because anymore,
movies.
every 3-4 weeks, a new one comes out, and, Disney and DreamWorks can't do them all. So
It's true.
I guess if you pick the right time, you're always going to make a little bit of money.
Because people like to take their kids out to see just about anything.
Exactly. And if they've already seen Frozen or whatever else is out at the time, oh, The Nut Job, let's try that one.
I mean, it wasn't great, but I think looking at it from a kid's perspective, you could get some okay entertainment out of it.
Justin, what do you think of The Nut Job?
January always seems to be a feeding ground for less than stellar fare that takes a concept from a film that did it significantly better. In this case, that film is Over the Hedge, which is rarely talked about, but was an animated film that was really kind of funny, and it's little cuddly creatures stealing from humans to survive. To be fair, Will Arnett does his best to keep the film entertaining, but unfortunately his entire performance is bogged down by a very dark parallel story involving gangsters, and another consistently awful performance by Katherine Heigl. The Nut Job is not going to be the worst of 2014, but it's just another family film bound to bore parents, but entertain children, so for that, I'm going to give it a D.
I think it's a little bit low, but,
I mean, well, I can understand that, really, but...
You do have to at least a little bit take in consideration how kids might view it.
Which I am.
So you would have given it an F, otherwise.
Probably. The storyline was seen before the acting...
Well,
yeah,
hey,
but not by
pretty
kids.
bad.
I mean, how many kids
know that
in right now have seen Over the Hedge?
I mean, they're like...
Probably not many.
That's true.
I would say.
And to be fair, I thought there were hints of good things. I actually liked, of course, the gangster storyline. I thought
figured
that
you would.
There was potential for something really good there. I honestly thought it was better than the actual story. What little we saw of it.
That was one of the few sort of bright spots.
I was like,
that and Will Arnett's performance was
Will
probably...
Arnett is Batman, so he's awesome.
Here's the problem with that parallel story, though.
Here it comes.
One, it's way too dark for kids.
I would disagree.
I would disagree with that, too.
Just
Two?
because something's dark, excuse me,
Go
just
on.
because something's dark doesn't mean kids can't handle it. Give them a happy ending. They can deal with it. But
No.
The Lion King is literally one of the darkest things that's ever...
thank you.
been
Compared
put
to
on
The Lion
screen.
King, that was pretty light.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. We could never get away with The Lion King in this day and age.
I don't agree with that at all.
I don't know about that.
I mean, it wouldn't be rated G like it was back then. Although when they re-released it last year, it was rated
It's
G.
still kind of G, yeah.
Pixar kills some of its villains.
You know?
It does, but they don't kill the dad in the first act of the movie.
Point is, this is far from the darkest thing in a kid's movie.
But
Let me get to point number 2.
okay,
It doesn't go anywhere.
you're right. It doesn't. I'm just pointing out that there were hints of good things there. I agree it doesn't go anywhere. But
No, I mean, I was like thinking, okay, maybe there's a way that these two storylines can intersect, or it's mirroring the story of Surly, or it's trying to do something kind of cool, but it's just not.
Well, it sort of mirrored the story with Surly.
because he was heisting the
Because
nut-
he was heisting the nuts, and there was some double crossing going on. I can't believe I'm actually having this conversation about the nut job.
Well, it's just
But-
that what I'm trying to say is that there were some salvageable...
Yeah, I think it paralleled Surly's story a little bit.
Well, one thing I want to go into is why I think that a D might be a little harsh is because at the end of the day, the message for the story was good, and I think kids could get something out of that.
Hence why I said it gets a D. It's not completely awful, where it could have, had they actually polished it, it might have actually been okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's generic. It tries to do something that's been seen before and done better, and the animation is still kind of pathetic. Not to mention, Katherine Heigl ruins everything. Therefore, I feel like the D is warranted.
All right. Not a fan. All right, next up is Inside Llewyn Davis, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
Inside Llewyn Davis, a 2013 film directed, written, and edited by the Coen brothers, the quirky team that brought you such masterpieces as Fargo and The Big Lebowski, among others. The film takes place in the early 1960s and is centered around a struggling musician named Llewyn Davis, as the title suggests. The movie takes place during 1 week in Davis's life, a character partially inspired by the autobiography of Dave Van Ronk. The primary narrative follows Davis in his struggle and includes losing a friend's cat, taking along another cat as a sidekick of sorts, in addition to facing an angry ex-lover, his irritable sister, and an aging father. Bad luck seems to come up whenever Llewyn is in any of his endeavors, though it seems to almost always be counterbalanced by help from his various friends. This tale, as often with the Coen Brothers movies, is rife with strange, interesting, and kooky characters that Llewyn encounters, the most notable of which appears in the film's second act, as Davis travels from New York to Chicago in one last desperate effort to find a good gig. This was a film that I had no real expectations for, but I can honestly say that I really enjoyed it. There is something so subtle in the simplicity of the story, balanced by a sharp editing and the use of music to create a beautiful, if not tragic, atmosphere. I feel that this film is really paying tribute to a not often talked about part of American culture, that being early folk music of the 1960s. True, icons like Bob Dylan made a huge impact, but folk has never really been as important or popular as it was then. Though social change was a big part of the folk scene, this film offers a slightly different view, being about the struggle of an artist who was a little before his time. However, though there is an element of romanticism and playful nostalgia, this film is more of an exploration of the dirty underbelly of the time. Whether it be early abortion, drug addiction, class struggle, or simple harsh criticism, many points are touched upon. Oscar Isaac gives an amazing and heartfelt performance, bringing us a very human character. He is both a self-absorbed, pretentious beatnik who often feeds off others' generosity, as well as an idealistic dreamer who has fallen on hard times, but won't leave a house cat in jeopardy. Like most people, Davis is a complicated man living in a complicated time. This movie is a great human interest story, though it does leave some questions unanswered and a kind of bittersweet ending. Still, it was a snapshot of the times and was done so beautifully. On a final note, the music in this movie was phenomenal. I give Llewyn Davis an A+.
Nice. Now, Justin and I had seen this before last week's show when we did the top 5 Oscar snubs. So with that wonderful grade there, I imagine you would have had Llewyn Davis somewhere in your top 5 for Best Picture snub, maybe, or Oscar Isaac.
As I was watching, I kind of felt like it's one of those movies that you know people are going to be talking about for years afterwards. It's like a kind of a classic in the making. So, yeah, I think definitely for Best Picture, directors, and actor, I think. And I know it's up for, obviously, as I mentioned, cinematography and sound mixing, which you did a great job with as well. But I think it definitely needs some love in the major categories.
I completely agree. Justin and I both had it for Best Picture contender in our top 5 snubs. And this movie is an absolutely star-making turn for Oscar Isaac. He was fantastic. Unfortunately, since the Academy didn't take that notice, so it didn't get a wider release, it's only a star-making turn within the industry. But hopefully it will lead to higher profile roles down the line for Isaac. He has a much meatier role here than he had in movies like Sucker Punch or W.E., but Llewyn could have been little more than a selfish narcissist. And like you mentioned, he kind of is that, but the way Isaac plays him, not to mention how the Coen brothers wrote him, he's got so many more layers than just that. He's got principles, oftentimes to his own detriment, and he's got baggage to spare as well. Like many Coen brother characters, you really do have to get inside Llewyn to try and understand him. John Goodman, the brothers' lucky charm, does give a spirited performance as Ronald Turner, which you mentioned, a man Llewyn meets on the road to Chicago, and Carey Mulligan gives an almost unrecognizable performance as Llewyn's frenemy, Gene. The music in this film does set the tone perfectly, as Joe mentioned, and as usual with the Coens, some things are a little bit too quirky for their own good, but this is a film that was criminally snubbed by the Oscars for this year, and I thought it was especially curious given their history with the Coen brothers, and I do believe Llewyn is one of their best films yet. I give it an A. Justin, we know from last week's show you're a fan, but let's hear the whole review.
Now, when Dan and I came out of this film, I offered up a rough idea for my 5-word review, and I think I still stand by it. What was the Academy thinking? Inside Llewyn Davis truly is a great film that audiences don't get nearly enough of, and I find that an absolute shame. Amidst great music, one being so wonderfully bad that it makes me love it all the more, comes a more than compelling and original narrative. As I mentioned last week, Oscar Isaac gave one of the year's best performances as Davis, and the supporting cast does a relatively memorable job as well, notably Carey Mulligan and Justin Timberlake. Though what makes the film truly one of the year's best films comes from the fact of how open it is for a variety of different viewers. It's readily accessible for one just looking for a different kind of movie, while one of the more deeper viewers could easily look at it as a more symbolic and even psychological level. Inside Llewyn Davis was a fantastic film that I cannot believe only managed to get a few nominations at the Oscars this year, and I give it a very well-deserved A+.
That's your first official A+ on the show.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for season 2, definitely.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It could hold so much weight for so many different types of moviegoers. You certainly don't have to be a folk music fan to enjoy it, or a music fan in general.
No.
You know, it's such a character-driven story that, you know, folk music happens to be the backdrop of.
But it could be anything.
But it could be anything. You're absolutely right. He could be a painter, you know, or
a poet.
A poet, or an actor. He could be anything.
Any kind of artist. Like,
yeah.
This really is like the true story of a struggling artist.
Right. It really hit a lot of really, really great notes, no pun intended. And obviously this has almost disappeared from theaters since the Oscars didn't recognize it, so hopefully it'll be a quick ride to DVD and Blu-ray for this movie, and the folks that have not gotten to check it out so far can do so.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, moving on, we've got Devil's Due, and this is in a movie in which newlyweds Zach and Samantha McCall, played by Zach Gilford and Allison Miller, go to the Dominican Republic on their honeymoon when they decide to visit a fortune teller for a quick laugh, and then get freaked out by the reading, then hop into a cab where the driver takes them to some sort of a bizarre satanic nightclub. They find out a few weeks later that they're pregnant, and from there, really strange things start happening, and everybody that comes in contact with pregnant Samantha suffers a bad fate. This is the latest in a very tiresome found footage genre, of which we just saw an entry 2 weeks ago with the latest Paranormal Activity film. Devil's Due isn't quite as horrible as its reputation or its extremely low box office receipts would indicate, but its biggest problem is that its story is not at all original. So to cope for that, it tries to do something original with the found footage bit, which it actually succeeds at for a little while, just in the type of footage shot and in what ways it's presented. But it's far from enough to call this film original at all. It is, however, definitely scarier than the aforementioned Paranormal Activity film, and so I give it the same grade I awarded that film with, and that's a C-. Justin, what do you think of Devil's Due?
When the first trailers of this hit, I was convinced that this would likely end up being my first F for 2014. Obviously, as we saw in the last episode, that privilege now belongs to the Legend of Hercules, but this barely evades that fate.
Well, that makes sense, Justin.
Yeah.
This is largely due in part to the first 20 minutes or so of the film, when the horror aspect of the story is absent and is instead about a recently married couple. Allison Miller and Zach Gilford still give relatively B acting performances, but they still portray interesting characters that are for the most part entertaining to watch on screen for the first act of the film. However, the remaining 2 acts of the film are so hilariously bad and predictable, it nearly brings the movie into F territory, and its pitiful ending does little to add to that. However, for those decent 20 minutes or so, I will spare having 2 Fs in January, and I give Devil's Due a D.
So your favorite part of the horror movie was the non-horror part.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, I actually
That's a
did
bad
kind of
sign.
I did actually kind of like these characters before everything started going horribly, horribly wrong.
So you just wanted to see a romantic drama with these characters and no satanic baby.
Or at least something that wasn't predictable or hilariously awful.
Joe, what'd you think of Devil's Due?
Devil's Due. This one surprised me a little bit. After being introduced to Paranormal Activity through a fairly mediocre movie, I wasn't really in the mood for the next found footage horror of the week. The plot is nothing new, as you guys mentioned, which is probably its biggest problem, having been used many times even within the found footage subgenre of horror films. Still, I have to applaud this movie for doing some things right. Unlike most similarly made films, this one actually had valid reasons for why the cameras were on, even in the most inappropriate of times, for the most part. I also really liked the personal documentary style, which seemed to be somewhat believable to some extent, and some actually pretty good performances, particularly from the lead actor. These elements managed to keep me kind of interested enough in the movie to keep me from being bored with it, at least up until the last act. Sadly, this film was also extremely cliche in its plot, as we mentioned, as well as its tropes, and it wasn't really all that scary, which is a big crime. A mixed bag, maybe worth the watch. I give Devil's Due a D+.
I found it a little bit interesting how they sort of integrated the different footages. You know, some were from this like lapel cam that he was given. Some were with the handheld cam. Some were taken from like store cameras or police cameras. I thought that was at least a little bit interesting.
Stylistically, I think that was the coolest part of it for me. Like, oh, that's kind of cool.
I'll be honest, during all those segments, I kept thinking of Chronicle, which had a better reason to utilize that.
They used a lot of different methods of footage. I thought it was all from Dane DeHaan's camera, right?
Most of it was.
It was, but it was also from a couple different cameras, like cell phones. It's essentially about him basically recording his entire life on camera.
Right.
So, obviously, he implements that from a number of different angles throughout the film.
That was similar.
And honestly, I think it did it better, especially when it incorporates that with the overall superpowers.
Yeah, that's probably true. I guess because it was a bigger budget movie, I was distracted a little more when I was watching Chronicle, but I could see that.
Well, and it had a better story, too.
Well, no question there.
Maybe that's why I wasn't focusing on the little details, but that might very well be true. But I also liked the performances. I thought they made the characters likable. I thought they did a really good job. I wasn't expecting that.
Well, and any fan of the television show Friday Night Lights, knows Zach Gilford and his acting chops. It's sort of unfortunate that he hasn't reached that Taylor Kitsch level yet of let's at least try and give him a starring performance or something, because he is a really good actor.
I think he could pull it off.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time. I mean, even if he only ends up heading into Kyle Chandler territory, I wouldn't consider that a bad thing.
Well, that's true. Chandler doesn't really headline, but he cleans up very nicely. And
he's a great supporting man.
Supporting roles in many, many films. Recently, we saw him in The Wolf of Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I expected really horrible things from Devil's Due just based on what everyone has said about it.
And the trailers.
And obviously no one went to go see it. But, I thought it was a little bit of a surprise because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think it was completely horrible. There were some things I actually did like about it. I was expecting it to be a complete failure.
Mm-hmm.
Same, actually.
Yeah, so sometimes that helps to grade a little bit when you have such low expectations.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, up next is our home media moment, and this is a movie that Justin actually mentioned on the show when we reviewed The Great Beauty on last week's program, because this movie is also up in the Best Foreign Language category at this year's Oscars, and that is The Hunt. Justin?
So Lucas, played by Mads Mikkelsen, is a kindergarten teacher trying to rebuild his life by starting a relationship and continue to fight for custody of his son. Though when a student accuses him of making her perform sexual acts, his career, and his entire life for that matter, is called into question. Much like Prisoners and 12 Years a Slave, this is a tough film to watch. Though The Hunt is nowhere near as brutal as either of those films, the sheer dilemma of the film and the reactions of the various characters offer painful, realistic honesty. As such, Lucas's struggle to prove his innocence is often not only frustrating, but also incredibly disturbing. One could argue it might slightly go too far at times, but these help paint the ugliness of a society unwilling to listen to reason. Alongside this realism, The Hunt offers great polished writing to tell its story, and Mikkelsen completely drives home Lucas's desperation and stress. It does falter a little bit when the conclusion poses more or less of a new issue rather than resolving everything completely, but as a whole, The Hunt is a very well done film, more than worthy of taking the Oscar for Best Foreign Film, and I give it a B+.
Joe, what did you think of The Hunt?
I think I might echo Justin a little bit. This movie is one of the best dramas I've seen in a while. The performances are subtle but incredibly human, and it brilliantly matches the intense and rather uncomfortable subject matter of the film. The movie examines how powerful words are, how perception can really get out of hand, and how delicate the matter of pedophilia can be. Mikkelsen continues to prove how dynamic of a performer he is. The story in particular showcases his ability to play an honest man whose life is slowly being ruined. This film was somber, dark, and very well shot. It's down to earth, but honestly somewhat unsettling. An excellent commentary on the tensions that can arise in any community. I think it's a very poignant issue that is really something that is worth talking about. Admittedly, it had a bit of a slow start, but the payoff was well worth it. I happily give The Hunt an A.
You really liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. The Hunt is about the closest thing to a modern-day witch hunt as I've seen. at least from a whole town. You mentioned Prisoners, Justin. Obviously, Hugh Jackman was sort of on a one-man witch hunt. But as far as entire persecution from a whole town, it goes to the hunt. The film has a scary realism that reflects that not only our society is like this, but that it happens around the world. I'm guilty of it. Everybody's guilty of it. Judging a situation and a person not only before you know all the facts, but before you know any of them, or even sometimes any of the people involved. It is a tough film to watch, but from the start, we all know as the audience that Lucas is innocent. Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of helps us along, because certainly it's a lot easier to watch than 12 Years a Slave or, Prisoners even. But Mads Mikkelsen gives a fantastic performance as Lucas. And really all the performances in The Hunt are very good, especially from, like I said, Mikkelsen, but the children as well. And the way it's shot really brings you to what Lucas is going through and all the horrible people in the town who crucify him. Now, this is only the second film from the 2013 Oscar nomination list for Best Foreign Film that I've seen, but I'm pulling this one to take it, as it is much better than The Great Beauty, and I give The Hunt an A-. Definitely an interesting story.
Yeah, it's very good.
I'm glad I talked you guys into this one.
Yeah, that was a good pick.
Yeah, we were originally actually going to do a different foreign language film that recently came out on DVD, which was certainly much more underwhelming than The Hunt. So I'm glad we saw this one too. And I don't believe any of the other nominees are out yet on DVD as this one is. So you can check this out on DVD, or it is available on Netflix Instant as well. So you can check it out there if you have that. Definitely recommended. Joe, you really enjoyed it.
I thought it was excellent.
It
was very well done. I think that if you can handle it, it's definitely one to check out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One we might hear from you about when we revisit our top 20 of the year.
It could be another one.
Yeah. Which we'll be doing in just about a month. The week before the Oscars, we will revisit our top 20 films of the year, as by then we will have seen all of them. Next week is our last of the real big titles, and that's Nebraska. So we're going to talk about that on next week's program. Let's move into our top 5 this week, and in honor of Llewyn Davis's cat, we've got the top 5 live-action movie animals. We decided to stick with live action just because there's obviously countless animated animals, but we can really hone in on the live-action ones this way. So, Joe, why don't we start with you, and we'll hear your favorite movie animals 5 through 2.
All right. I tried to stick to animals that didn't talk just to kind of keep it a little more, quote, unquote, realistic, though that's going to be a complete failure by the list, but it's what I was going for. And starting off is number 5 would be Richard Parker from The Life of Pi. I think the bond between Pi and this majestic creature is truly awesome, despite the fantastical nature of the story and the CGI nature of the creation, but when they part ways, it was really quite touching. Number 4 is Jaws, from the Jaws series. He's the only bad guy on my list, and that's because I can't think of any other animal that can be so menacing without being seen as much at the time, and to do it for multiple movies. He's more than a beast, he's a force of evil, and that's why I like him. Number 3 is Hidalgo from Hidalgo. It's a fun movie, and it really is held together by this magnificent horse and the chemistry with Viggo Mortensen that made it a really fun ride for me. And my number 2 is Botat from Operation Dumbo Drop. The elephant with...
You do love Operation Dumbo Drop.
I do love Operation Dumbo Drop. It's great.
I never thought I'd ever hear that movie reference on this podcast.
Oh, he loves it.
Hey, it's my number 2. Okay, I knew.
He mentions it in real life enough. Why not on the show?
I talked about it a couple times. Anyway, the elephant with the gentleness and sense of humor that makes the struggle for the brave soldiers worth it in this Disney classic of the 90s. I love this movie and the elephant it stars.
Very nice. I love that you put Richard Parker on there. That was my alternate number 5. He's a great character.
He is.
He really is. Even from when we first see him in Life of Pi, before they are out on the boat, you sort of get his sense of character there.
When he magically snatches the deer through the bars.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he does.
And manages to rip it through the bars without damaging it.
Yes.
He creates a plot hole immediately.
Well, he does.
With how awesome his character is.
But he's great. So
he is great.
And no one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares.
It's true. All right, Justin, we can go with yours.
You sure?
Yeah, we'll do yours.
Dan's excited.
All right. I hope I don't disappoint by that logic then. Okay, number 5. Asta from the Thin Man series.
Of course.
Although the Thin Man series is largely about the comedic detective antics of socialites Nick and Nora, I have to give credit to their lovable canine companion. While Asta doesn't get nearly enough to do, and often his side stories are left unresolved, such as in After the Thin Man, I have to give Asta credit for being one of the more memorable live-action animals in cinema. Number 4 is the cat, or cats, in Inside Llewyn Davis. One does have a name. I've decided to strike the name just for the sake of the surprise. An important component of a great film is having great characters, often in the most unlikely of places. Inside Llewyn Davis is no exception to that component. While it's hard to explain in detail what makes this feline or felines memorable without giving spoilers, but watching how the cat gets integrated into the storyline gives it not only the signature quirky humor of the Coen brothers, but makes the narrative all the more compelling. Number 3 is the titular pig, Babe. There's no question that audiences love an underdog, and Babe embraces that to the fullest extent of the word. Granted, I would argue that the popularity of this film created an overflow of talking animal films to follow, and an incredibly dry sequel, but watching Babe defy his destiny is both adorable and very entertaining. Whether or not this deserved Best Picture could be argued, but for having a great live-action animal, Babe goes against the grain of the usual cat and dog norm, and is well deserving of a spot in this list. And my number 2, the dog, who I repeatedly refer to by his real name, Uggy, from The Artist. Oh boy, Dan's already done it all.
I just thought that was going to be your number 1, knowing you. Classic Uggy.
Classic Uggy, indeed. In a number of films, audiences could argue that an actor ends up stealing his show from the lead. For The Artist, that has to be George Valentine's lovable Jack Russell Terrier, who, as I mentioned, I usually just refer to as Uggy, and manages to be hilariously cute as a button, but has one moment of heroism near the end that could easily give Lassie a run for his money. While The Artist did have its fair share of criticism, most agreed that Uggy was by far the best aspect of the film, and posed the question of whether or not an animal can, or should, be nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and for that I have to give him my runner-up for Best Live-Action Animals. You guys laugh, but there were when that came out, there were a lot of people saying Uggy should be up for Best Supporting Actor, and I'm not making this up. That
is kind of crazy.
That's awesome.
It is a little bit, but it did happen. Hey, I'm not exaggerating that.
Technically speaking, the dog is a character, an important character of the film.
Oh, I agree.
Hey.
It's crazy when it could happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Interesting times.
All right. Well, we'll get to your gentlemen's number 1s soon enough. My number 5 is Wilbur the Pig. And this is, of course, from the live-action version of Charlotte's Web from 2006, as we are doing live-action animals and not animated ones. As Joe mentioned off-air earlier, you cannot compete with the original animated version of Charlotte's Web.
Which is why you're number 5 to cheat.
However...
Nice.
However, listen, Wilbur is a great character, and, without him, you don't have Charlotte making her beautiful web designs.
You still cheated.
Etc., etc. How is that a cheat?
I know you want to do the animation one.
No, I actually am perfectly fine putting the live action one on.
Okay.
Here. I really am.
Well,
you haven't seen it yet?
I have not seen it.
Yeah.
So
it's a perfectly fine movie.
So Wilbur is like, would you say he's on par with the animated Wilbur? Or is it just a very different portrayal? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's different. I mean, it's hard to really replicate what animated animals can do for real life animals. Mm-hmm. So it's slightly different, but you don't feel any less love for the character.
Okay.
And to be fair, my number 5, like I mentioned, was Richard Parker, but you guys said you didn't want us to use CGI animals, so I took him off the list. So, to be fair,
I cheated too.
Right. All right, my number 4 is Uggy from The Artist. I'm excited to watch this movie again for Oscar A to Z. It's coming up in a few months. I've only seen it once, but obviously Uggy was a huge part of its success. I'm shocked that people thought he should have been nominated for supporting actor Oscar, but what can you do? He's certainly the comic relief of the film. My number 3 is Willie from Free Willy. When I sort of looked at this list, a lot of my thought basis was how integral are the animals to the plot. Obviously, Willie is the entire basis for the film, and Free Willy was one of my childhood sentimental favorites. I actually think I saw it 3 times in theaters, and many, many viewings subsequently on DVD. And it's a tearjerker, and Willie is obviously at the core of that. My number 2 is Toto from The Wizard of Oz. Even though he doesn't really say much, and once they get to Oz, he doesn't really do a whole lot, but when you think about it, the entire crux of the movie is because of Toto. The reason Dorothy runs away in the first place is because Miss Gulch is going to take Toto away, and she feels like because of that her parents or her aunt and uncle don't understand her. So really, without Toto, you don't have the Wizard of Oz because she never would have run away in the first place.
I like that. It's good.
Thanks.
No, logical. I like that.
Joe?
My number 1 is Verdell from As Good as It Gets. It's smart, lovable, and honestly the first person to change Jack Nicholson's character. And as the film goes on, it continues to bring everyone together, even in the worst circumstances. Verdell is just, honestly, one of, if not the best dog in cinema. It's truly integral, and that classic scene, it's on every cover, Jack Nicholson with the dog.
That is true.
And it's so awesome how this, you just cannot love this dog. And it melts your heart every time. And it's just, I think, a testament to how great the movie was. And once again, very integral to the plot.
Good choice.
Thank you.
That's another one I'm very excited to watch upcoming for the Oscar A to Z.
Same, actually.
It's been a long time since I've seen that movie.
I've seen it several times.
And I've never seen it at all.
I know.
It's okay, Justin. You'll get there.
Well, I think we had discussed that, Justin, and I had told you just to not bother because we're going to watch it soon enough for the A to Z. And there's so many other holes in your repertoire to get to.
I have a lot of gaps, agreed.
What's your number 1?
All right. Toto from The Wizard of Oz.
Ooh, how exciting.
In the end, for me, there's no way Toto couldn't take number 1 for Best Live Action Animals. Yes, he's the causal agent for some of the early mishaps, but the way he compensates by taking the lead and keeping his co-stars motivated and focused more than makes up for it throughout the story. As a result, his antics manage to be funny, but also keep the story moving and interesting, more than contributing to what makes The Wizard of Oz a classic.
Good job, Justin.
It's a good one.
What a great number 1.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
It does. Yeah, it does make sense. I really thought hard about whether I wanted him at number 1 or not. Wizard of Oz is obviously my favorite, but I thought maybe that made it way too obvious. And I have for my number 1 Marley from Marley and Me. Now, I am not a big dog person. If I'm going to like a dog, it's going to be a Toto, an Uggy, an Asta. But Marley sort of broke the trend on that. And even though he was a very, very bad dog, he was part of the family. And I think it's something that every pet owner can relate to. My cats are kind of wild, and one of my cats likes to destroy my things, but you still love him. He's your cat. He's your family, and that is exactly what Marley evokes, I think, in everybody that watches Marley and Me. So that's my number 1.
As I was mentioning Justin the other night, actually, I've never seen it.
It is incredibly good.
I heard mixed things.
I was very surprised about it. Justin, I know you're not much of an Aniston fan. Have you seen Marley and Me?
I have, actually.
Okay.
To be honest, I thought she was perfect for the role. I don't think the execution was as well as it could have been. However, I was actually talking to Joe about this last night. If I took the liberty of actually reading the book before seeing the movie.
Oh, okay.
The book is not necessarily for kids, and they tone it down for PG for the movie, and it's kind of an issue. Her character is really well written in the book. In the movie, she does, like I said, okay with it. Wilson really brought the character home. The way I phrased it to Joe was, if you like dogs, read the book. If you like the book, see the movie. It's a good movie. It's just not like the greatest dog movie ever made.
Yeah, but I don't know that I would agree with that recommendation because I don't necessarily like dogs, and I loved it. I'm a cat person. We all know that.
Well, yes, you are. But
So, I mean, I think it's a movie for pet owners. At the end of the movie, I don't think it's a spoiler to say what happens because I think generally everyone knows. But anyway, at the end of the movie, I found my cats and I hugged them, and I was just bawling my eyes out, not being a dog person. I was still very, very touched by it. And I think that speaks to the humanness of the story.
I think there's something for everyone who has an attachment to animals with that movie.
Yeah, I agree. And I have to say, I think it's probably Owen Wilson's best performance.
I'd still give it to Darjeeling. Joe, I have, ever since you mentioned Minus Man,
I was going to say Minus Man is my go-to, but
I have been intrigued to actually get that movie and watch it. I haven't done it yet, but I promise you I will.
You're probably going to hate it. It's fine, but that's my go-to.
I've never even heard of Minus Man.
And it's funny because I know this is really off topic, but it just makes me think, we bring it up every time. I remember when I rented it, there was a preview for it, like at some arts festival, and like some guy was like, man, I have no idea what this movie Minus Man is about. Can you tell me? It's like, oh, wow, he's like killing people. It's like minus, like taking minus away, minus here, minus there. I was like, oh. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen.
Yikes.
But
so that's Minus Man, everyone.
Minus Man. No dogs at all in that movie. But
probably a good thing.
Probably.
But your favorite Owen Wilson performance?
It's very different, but that's very off topic.
let's steer the ship back in the right direction.
I guess so.
And that is going to be for the triple feature, and that is our new classic, which this week is Beasts of the Southern Wild. Our old classic, which is part of Guilty Pleasure Month. Justin brought us Starship Troopers. And the Oscar A to Z movie for this week was Albert Nobbs, a recent addition to the Oscar list. First up is going to be Beasts of the Southern Wild, starring Quvenzhané Wallis, and that is Joe.
Beasts of the Southern Wild, a 2012 fantasy drama film based on the play Juicy and Delicious. The film stars Quvenzhané Wallis as a young girl, Hush Puppy, who, along with her hot-tempered father Wink, reside in the Bathtub, an island off the coast of Louisiana, which has become somewhat isolated from the rest of civilization. All seems to be going relatively well in their lives, despite the conditions of poverty, until a great flood destroys everything. This forces Hush Puppy and her father to decide if they should reside in their home or leave for good. This film seems to be a rather unique and thought-provoking balance between gritty social commentary on lower class survival in tsunami-ridden areas, and a more philosophical look at the balance of nature and man's place in such a balance. The story is told both simplistically and fantastically, much like through the eyes of a young child, in this case, Hush Puppy. The tsunami and the outsiders threaten to destroy the delicate balance of life of the bathtub, while the mythological beasts are how Hush Puppy sees these changes. Probably the strongest element of the film is the brilliant cinematography. This film utilizes its environment perfectly, creating a fluid representation of life in the Louisiana bayou. The performances are very good as well, particularly from Wallis, who delivers some rather profound dialogue rather smoothly. Her skill as an actress so young might take some off guard. This tells a simple but poignant story about two generations trying to survive in a world that is constantly threatening their way of life. I believe this film was trying to create a modern fairy tale, and I would say that it is partially successful. There is a real magic in the air that does seem rather subtle, but noticeable. However, I feel that some mystical elements weren't really integrated enough to really coincide with the realism of most of the film. It seems as if the filmmakers wanted more of a balance, but didn't know how to utilize the beasts of the Southern Wild themselves. They were visually interesting, but somewhat distracting for me, honestly. In fact, although the not-so-subtle themes of the film came off as borderline pretentious to me, it was hidden by the sincereness of Wallace's performance. I'm not sure if this was the intent, but it made some of the execution a little bit clumsy. Still, this film had some amazing ambition and mostly pulled it off, giving some of the best visual storytelling I've seen in years. I give Beasts of the Southern Wild an A-.
Cool. And you had not seen this film before.
Nope.
So I'm good. I'm glad you liked it.
It was good.
And Justin, what did you think of Beasts of the Southern Wild? You and I had seen this one before. We saw it when it was nominated for Oscars.
Beasts of the Southern Wild is a film that has a firm grasp on how and when to use their actors to their fullest potential. It's not always engaging, but it does reflect reality and marries itself well to the magical realism elements of the film that proceed later on. Quvenzhané Wallis may very well give one of the best child performances I have ever seen, playing Hush Puppy, a little girl just trying to bring cohesiveness to a world she feels desperately needs fixing. She's seen some aspects of the harshness of the world through her father Wink, but still retains childlike innocence, and how these two ways of life play off each other is raw and intense, yet also strangely beautiful. It's an original piece of film that audiences do not get nearly enough of, and I give it an A.
Very good. Even though the characters in Beasts, whose lives are completely foreign to me, their feelings of hopelessness and fear and sadness are completely universal to anybody. As you guys both mentioned, Wallace is obviously a brilliant young performer. If you don't know, she was also the youngest person ever to be nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. But Dwight Henry, as her father, is also really, really good and a strong performer. The look of the film is of a documentary, but not only are all of these actors, but it's a completely fiction story. But it could easily be real life, and you kind of believe that it is as you're watching it. It's a little bit too sentimental at times, and to be honest, I agree with Joe about the part with the beasts once they show up at the end of the film. They're kind of the worst part of the movie, and they sort of bring it to a confusing halt. I originally gave this film an A, sort of on the lower end of the A scale, but upon watching it the second time, I give it the same grade as Joe, and that is an A-. Still a very, very strong movie. But yeah, the beasts at the end, I don't know, the momentum of the story kind of stops.
I think it got a little lost in its message.
I do too. I don't think they knew exactly how to present it. You really like that part?
Well, before I go any further with that, I do want to confess that for my writer's seminar in grad school, our first assignment was to actually read the script of this movie.
Oh, okay.
Which is an incredibly good script. I'm not going to lie, but obviously we went into much further detail, and we saw the intricate elements of how this is such a well-told story and how it doesn't miss a beat and things like that.
From someone's point of view.
From someone's point of view, and I mean, everyone had a different take on it in the class.
I'm sure.
It was still relatively positive, but it was multiple different ideas and thoughts on it. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I got what they were trying to do, and I think it made sense when you think about the overlying theme of the film, which is balance and cohesiveness. However, I do see how it could get pretentious. I also think it's also a little bit of a matter of just essentially a girl facing her own demons. Is it a bit more explicit than, say, other indie films, which would maybe show you like a minor image here and there? Maybe, but I don't necessarily consider either way of doing it a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't know that for me it was executed properly.
I mean, all I would have wanted was a little bit more of it in the film, so it didn't seem like it kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it sort of came out of left field.
Because honestly, I liked the little bit of the beast we got, but honestly, it got kind of lost in, as I said, the gritty realism of the movie. It's almost like you could have taken out the beast, and the film really wouldn't have lost much, because you could have just had her talk about the beasts without any visuals, and they still would have kind of been there. Because, as you said, there is this magic throughout the movie. So I think that the fantasy was kind of there to buck it up. I think that somebody was lacking confidence somewhere.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a lack of confidence. I just say it was a matter of being more explicit than other movies, which would have just simply given it like a still image or something like that, or just cut to like a close-up of that tattoo that we saw earlier that originally introduces the Orlocks, aka the Beasts of the Southern Wild, as it's referred to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would have loved more screen time with them, but I also don't think that was necessarily the most necessary, intricate part of the movie.
Maybe not, but considering the fact that the movie is called The Beasts of the Southern Wild, and if they were going for a fantasy, it's listed as a fantasy drama. You know, it's
it
kind
is
of
a little.
I would have liked to have had a little more balance, as I said, because as you said, speaking to cohesiveness and balance, I feel the movie should have been a little more balanced in that.
Because that is the only part of fantasy in the whole film.
And I was a little...
The rest of it is completely and utterly realistic.
And the way you sold it to me, Justin, I was expecting a lot more because, as you said, I like my surrealist stuff. There was very little. And honestly, as far as, you know, vibrant imagery goes, it was a little weak.
I see your point about it, but the Beasts of the Southern Wild is more or less metaphor than actual beasts.
I get that, but if it's just a metaphor...
So execute it that way, then.
Exactly.
Which they did.
If it's a metaphor, then why bother having the actual story of the beast coming down?
Because you're viewing it from a kid's perspective.
It doesn't, but we need more of that in the movie. There was very little of that. We just had her speaking these things.
And that'll give you. I mean, it's there. It's good. I'm not sure if I agree with you that it was handled poorly. It fits the mindset of what a young girl is, and the entire movie is essentially giving you her view on everything versus the way the world is.
She seemed very, very intuitive for somebody who was so young, that the usage of these Orlocks being these furry beasts seems a little too childish to me.
And that's a fair statement. I mean, I know you didn't hate it. I'm just saying.
I did enjoy it. I'm just saying I wish that we could have gotten a little more of the fantasy that, to kind of balance things out, which was the theme of the movie.
All right, well, next up is Starship Troopers, this week's guilty pleasure pick, and it was chosen by Justin. So tell us about Starship Troopers.
Oh, boy.
This will be the good one.
Johnny Rico, played by Casper Van Dien, is a young man with a firm desire to do his duty as a citizen by serving on the mobile infantry to fight a spider-like alien menace, despite his parents' urges to begin a career at home. Though he struggles during his training, Rico discovers his determination as a soldier when he discovers that his hometown has been obliterated by the alien menace. On the surface, Starship Troopers seems like a campy but fun human versus aliens film, and to some extent that is what it is. However, thanks to director Paul Verhoeven's somewhat explicit directing style, one could argue this is a biting satire on military propaganda and how it manipulates youth to join them. Therefore, Starship Troopers works as a guilty pleasure for me, but it does have a couple hints of something deeper, which is why I wanted to run it for this month. That's not to say that some of the satirical angles don't come off as a bit over the top at times, but the argument still remains, and I still think it's a relatively fun movie with some good action sequences. The acting, obviously, is mediocre, but let's face it, this was a definitely shoot first, ask questions later movie, and just as a sort of sci-fi war action film, I'll give it credit where credit's due. So for Starship Troopers in all its campy glory, I give it a B.
Wow. All right, Joe, let's hear it.
Well, I'm a sci-fi fan. We should all know how this goes. All right.
A plus.
Starship Troopers. This particular movie is often considered to be something of a sci-fi classic, believe it or not. For the most part, I can see why. Part of it is for reasons you could probably guess. Troopers is cheesy in its execution, but actually gives us an engaging plot. The bugs are menacing and silly simultaneously, and the soldiers themselves are mostly likable, including the main protagonist, a good guy who we want honestly see survive. The dialogue is pretty bad, but for the most part, and the acting is really all over the place. Some of the actors give honest, if not flawed, performances, while others have fun with their roles, and even a few that are just flat out awful. However, it is all done in an over-top fashion that is purposeful in its tone of the movie. The film's plot isn't supposed to be taken too seriously, it's just meant to be fun. There is actually some strong anti-war messages in the movie, and some glaring commentaries on the effects of media on the populace through war propaganda and the flaws of an overly militaristic society. These themes, though presented very differently, are echoed in the classic novel on which they are based. It's corny, but it knows it is, and that is the fun. I give Starship Troopers a B-.
That's actually lower than I thought from you.
I'll echo that. I give you credit for that. I was expecting like a B+ or something from you.
No, I mean, it's still really cheesy.
It is, but it's fun.
No, it's fine.
Obviously, you don't share that thought, so we'll let you go ahead.
This should be the good one.
Well, whenever anybody talks about guilty pleasure movies, you know that yours are guilty for a reason. They're just not all that good. But something about it is very appealing to you, even if you can't necessarily put your finger on it. And while many people can get past that fact and enjoy whatever movie it is anyway, the movie, by definition, will always have plenty of detractors. Starship Troopers is one of those films that puts me in the detractor category. It's a film I've always heard about but never actually seen, so I am glad you brought it, Justin, but for me it's just not a fun bad movie, it's just a bad movie. I honestly think I might have felt a little bit differently about it if the lead had been pretty much anybody else other than Denise Richards. She's easily one of the worst actresses ever on screen, and it takes the film from maybe passable, campy, to virtually unwatchable. With Denise Richards at the helm, it honestly seems like not much different than your typical sci-fi channel movie like a Sharknado or something along those lines. Now, I did enjoy the method of conveying information to the audience with the like supposedly interactive videos, and the sheer seriousness that all the actors showed, as if they didn't know this movie was a joke from the start, kind of made me laugh a little bit, especially Neil Patrick Harris and Brenda Strong. But I think anybody could easily see how this movie would count as a quote-unquote guilty pleasure, and for me, it was no pleasure at all. I give Starship Troopers a D. Sorry, Justin.
No offense, Sam.
But, I mean, that's what guilty pleasures are all about. God knows I have plenty that you put in that D range.
Oh, yeah.
I think everybody's list of guilty pleasures sort of runs the gamut from passable to... I mean, we all watched Sucker Punch last week. And,
oh, God.
I mean, that's a horrible movie, but I know people that genuinely like it.
The dark side of it.
They know that it's terrible, but... they genuinely like it. I think Sucker Punch is another one of those kind of movies like Starship Troopers.
And you know what? I can see that. I personally still found it virtually unwatchable.
Same.
But I could see it. I could see how somebody could enjoy it.
Yeah. All right. Finally is Albert Nobbs. It's our Oscar A to Z film for the week. It's a 2011 drama film that scored 2 acting nominations, Glenn Close for Best Actress and Janet McTeer for Supporting Actress. They lost to Meryl Streep and Octavia Spencer, respectively. The film was also up for Best Makeup and lost there to The Iron Lady as well. Taking place in 19th century Ireland, the film stars Close as the title character, a man who is actually a woman living as a man so she can find work. She's been living this way for 3 decades, and to keep her secret alive, she's thrown herself entirely into her work so she doesn't have to have a social life, and at the same time, she gets to save up to buy a tobacco shop, which is Albert's dream. When a new painter named Hubert arrives at the hotel where Albert works as a waiter and is assigned to room with, Albert fears his secret will be discovered by Hubert, played by Janet McTeer. That means, yes, Hubert is also a woman living as a man for work purposes. They discover each other's secrets pretty quickly, and the rest of the film is spent dealing with these decisions and Albert finding a kindred spirit after all these years. But it's also bogged down by many pointless and tedious things, such as a relationship and eventual pregnancy between a handyman at the hotel, played by Aaron Johnson of Kick-Ass fame, and a hotel maid, played by Mia Wasikowska?
Wasikowska.
Alrighty. This film is something of a passion project of Close, who originally played Albert Nobbs 30 years ago in a stage play and spent decades trying to turn it into a film. As such, she also co-wrote and is one of the producers. Now, as far as passion projects go, there are certainly worse, but with projects like this, sometimes the person involved can't necessarily see the forest for the trees. Close obviously found herself a very meaty role with Albert, and her friendship with Hubert is the driving force for the film, but everything else suffers as a result. Johnson and Mia, what's-her-name, have possibly the worst accents we've ever talked about on this show, Irish or otherwise, and as such, their already painfully dull scenes are even worse. And before McTeer shows up, there's really not much going on. McTeer also makes a much more convincing man than Glenn Close does. Close looks the part, but it's hard to believe that she'd be able to keep everyone fooled for 30 years with the pitch and timbre of her voice. This film barely keeps afloat for me with a B-. And this is a film that Justin and I had both seen previously when it was nominated for Oscars a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Joe was new to this one, so Joe, I guess let's hear from you about Albert Nobbs first.
Sure. This movie doesn't really have much to offer for me personally. Though I did feel that Close did give a very good performance, most of the movie's plot just didn't interest me. In particular, there was one subplot that seemed to take up way too much time. And I believe that's the one with the handyman.
The relationship
with
and the
Kick-Ass that you were mentioning, and I think that was really one thing that killed it for me. That took up so much time. The acting was bad. The accents were terrible. I just found that completely part meandering, and there were huge sections of the film where I felt like it was just scenery, like that there was build-up, but there wasn't really that much meat to it. Still, the movie's main plot did have some value as a character study and some good costumes to boot, but I honestly didn't find it that engaging. I give Albert Nobbs a C+.
Okay. Justin, what do you think of it?
Albert Nobbs is a film that benefits from tackling a major, albeit seen-before, character study through class conflict in an unusual way that ends up being intriguing and relatively well told. Glenn Close completely sells the role of playing a woman living in a man's world, that she has to disguise herself to have any form of success. so well that the audience can immediately feel for not only her, but her co-star Janet McTeer as a woman essentially doing the same thing. It starts off as a little creepy, but as new light gets shed on these two characters as to why they're doing this, the more it feels that their predicament appears understandable. However, the film is betrayed by an overdeveloped side story involving Mia Wasikowska and an awful Aaron Taylor Johnson as secret lovers trying to manipulate Nobbs into giving them money to run away together. That storyline takes the audience out of the story every time and feels unnecessary, causing the film to run on entirely too long. That said, despite this flaw, Albert Nobbs is still a very well put together film with good performances and some relatively decent cinematography, and for that, I'm going to give it a B+.
I think that side story is just so awful and distracting. I can't, in good conscience, give it any more than a B-. I mean, that's not quite half the movie, but it's a pretty, like you said, I mean, it's a pretty lengthy B story.
Truly.
And it really makes it drag on. I'm actually surprised that, given that, because you seem to have felt the same way about it that we did.
However, with one major difference. I did like the overall compelling nature of the story. I know you mentioned that the early stuff before Janet McTeer shows up is rather dull. I disagree.
Yeah.
Like, I was looking forward to seeing how these pieces were going to fit together. The early stuff with Mia is actually relatively interesting until Aaron Taylor Johnson comes into the picture and just makes it a really mediocre soap opera.
I felt like, and Joe, I think you sort of were feeling the same way as we were watching it. Like, until Hubert shows up, the Janet McTeer character, I mean, yeah, the initial concept is interesting, but I don't know, I sort of
honestly
understood what was going on within the first few minutes and was satisfied with that exposition, and then it just kept going on and on. Like, I do appreciate what you're saying about the class culture and everything, and obviously that's a big part of the point of this movie, but I think that before Hubert showed up, it kind of started to drag a little bit.
I thought it was meandering a bit at the beginning.
Yeah.
It just didn't draw me in.
Well, it was setting the stage. I mean...
Yeah, but it set the stage for about a half an hour.
That's what I mean. Like, the stage could have been set in about 10 minutes, and then Hubert shows up.
Well, it's all in the handling. I mean, some movies want to get the ball rolling. Some movies take its time. This obviously isn't a movie where guns are going to go off every 30 seconds, or there's going to be, as you've mentioned in many comedy review, farcical nature of the storylines, which obviously can lend themselves to dramas, but in this case, that's not necessarily the element.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not necessarily even about that. It's about the runtime. I mean, if a movie is 2 hours and the first half hour could have been told very easily in 10 or 15 minutes.
Well, here's
you know what I mean?
Here's the thing, though. I think if they had taken out that love story between those two characters, it would have probably been a lot more of a balanced story.
Oh, well, yeah, no doubt. I still think the lead up before Hubert arrived takes a bit long. I mean, for me, the most compelling part of the whole film was the relationship between the two of them.
Those scenes were the best ones for me.
By far.
I agree, but they also want to establish the life Albert has been living before Hubert gets there. Don't get me wrong, Hubert is an important part of the story, and the way she plays the character to move it forward is really where the heart of the story unfolds. But we still need to see how this place works, how these classes work.
No, I got that, and they did show that.
They did.
A lot.
And I like that.
I just think that they could have made it a little more
engaging
engaging
I didn't
somehow.
need it to be that long. I got it after a little bit.
Yeah, I think they set the tone pretty well in the first 10 minutes.
Did you think that Glenn Close was a convincing man? Because that was Joe's, I think, biggest issue as we were watching.
All right, I'll confess.
I didn't have as much of a problem with it as you did, Joe.
No,
but
okay. She gave a good performance performing a man, kind of excluding the fact that people obviously wouldn't know she's a man. With the pitch of her voice, as Dan mentioned, like, I did not buy that she was a man for the entire movie.
I think she looked much more the part than she sounded.
And that was distracting for me, and so maybe that's what I felt hurt the performance a little bit. I thought it was a good performance, but I understand why she didn't win. Mm-hmm. And maybe it was the voice thing, maybe that's just taking the context for the story. It bugged me, and that's why I didn't think it was that impressive.
Here's my argument to answer your question.
Sure.
Does she sound like a man? Not necessarily. However, the role she was playing, being a kind of like butler / waiter kind of person, she doesn't have to talk all that much. So it doesn't surprise me that she can get away with like a straight phrase or two, and it's a little higher pitched.
I just think it's a little far-fetched that for 30 years she'd be able to get away with that. I totally see what you're saying. It's not like her job really... I mean, she's not giving speeches or anything.
No.
Wasn't she?
But maybe a few months worth of that.
Well,
30 years of going undetected, I think, is a little far-fetched.
If I remember correctly, she was kind of a well-known, well-respected member of the staff.
She was, because she was basically seen and seldom heard.
But, I mean, from the other workers, they were like, oh...
I mean, people did hold conversations with him.
Yeah, they talked to her like, oh,
yeah.
Like, he's the number one guy around here. He runs this place. Like, among the servants, where they're a little closer knit in that particular class.
Yeah, but even then, I mean... Do you really want to question the person in charge in that day and age where you could easily get fired and be out of a job?
30 years?
For a long time.
Yeah, but he wasn't in charge when he first got there.
You know he had to work his way up.
He worked his way up, and so I
obviously
don't know.
You could see the same situation with when Albert started, just only speaking a couple phrases here and there, and obviously no one will notice.
But I mean, you compare her portrayal of a man to Janet McTeer's, who looks more like a man and has a deeper kind of pitch to her voice. I think, it's a lot easier for Hubert to go undetected than...
But it's also two entirely different roles.
Yeah, that's true, but they're both doing the same thing.
They are doing the same thing, but she's also playing a character that, like I said, doesn't have to speak a whole lot. Hubert, because of her job, has to speak more, and obviously needs to learn a more masculine sounding voice so she doesn't get detected.
I just think over 30 years somebody would have said, you sound like a woman. I mean, that was a huge problem. Every time Albert Nobbs spoke, Joe was like, you're clearly a woman.
How do you say in a society like that, you sound like a woman without being ridiculously offensive?
I'm sure some people would have been bold.
Oh, some people would have been bold. We saw that when we saw Nicholas Nickleby. But
that's what I mean.
Some people
like proving the point.
Oh, you're not quite a gentleman. You sound like a woman.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to leave it at that because our time is up. Joe, do you have the new page up and running yet on YouTube?
Oh,
or
yeah.
That's still in process.
Oh, no. It's up. It's the new collab group. The Green Clan is officially disbanded, but it's a lot of the same members, and we have uploaded our first video, and it is the Phantom group. Our first video was on our favorite and least favorite Cowboy Bebop characters. So check that out. I put up my Q&A video recently on my own channel, and that's all I have at the moment.
Very cool. All right, and we'll link to those at the bottom of our page here. If you have not joined the Facebook group yet, we have started to post our 5-word reviews. A couple of days before the podcast even goes up, we will give you our 5-word reviews on some of the hottest new movies that we'll be reviewing on that week's show. And that is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. You can find that on Facebook. And our Twitter feed will have those 5-word reviews as well. And at both places, you can find out when our new podcasts are up. And the Twitter is at Film Fanatics Pod. And, of course, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thanks for listening. That's been Film Fanatics for this week. And we'll see you back here next time. Bye!